Everybody, a source told ESPN that barring any unforeseen health setback, RG3 will start this week against the Bengals. Griffin hasn't played since week 1 when he threw for 190 yards, no TDs, and threw a pick before going down with a shoulder injury. The Browns, they're 0-12 and trying to avoid becoming the second team in NFL history to finish a season 0-16. Stephen A., RG3 starting, should he be?
Well, I don't mind him starting now because they're winless. They're not going anywhere. And I guess it's good for him to get in reps and try to define whether or not he's suited to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. I think RG3's career as a starter is over. I think it's a foregone conclusion. Certainly, you look at the Browns and you say to yourself, Terrell Pryor, I've been very, very impressed with him. Not much else on their roster right now. Feel incredibly sorry for what Hugh Jackson is going through. It's got to be torture. But I'm just of the mindset that RG3 has basically played one game since 2014. He sat on the bench for the entire 2015 season where Dan Snyder and those boys wouldn't even allow him to dress in uniform because if he got hurt, they would owe him $16 million. They were not going to let that happen. 2016, we see what it is right there. He's only played one game this year. So I look at it from the standpoint that going into next year, he will have been out like 2 full years plus another half year because he got injured in 2014. I just view him as an individual who's finished as a starter. Everything that I've been taught about the NFL, you got it, you got it. You don't, you don't. That doesn't mean he can't wear an NFL uniform. Doesn't mean he can't be a reserve. But as a franchise guy, as the guy that's my starting quarterback, I just don't see him being that dude any longer. I think this is the beginning of the official end of RG3 as a starting quarterback in the National Football League.
It's funny how that works in the NFL. Your brand gets tarnished. A lot of times it's because of injury or because you're on a bad team, and then all of a sudden the perception of you changes, and then you're not a starter. It happened to Kurt Warner. Off the greatest show on turf. All of a sudden, he's hurt. He's not starting. Now he's a tackling dummy behind a bad offensive line for the Giants because they had drafted Eli. They didn't want him taking those shots. But Kurt Warner could still play. Now, I'm not suggesting RG3 is Kurt Warner, but I've seen him achieve at a very high level over the full course of an NFL season. And I've never seen him as like a straight bum. I've never seen a healthy RG3 and look at him like, boy, that guy really stinks. At worst, he's like a below-average quarterback. So he may not be a franchise quarterback of the kind that gets paid those max dollars. But show me someone better for the Browns right now. I think he could start for a couple teams.
Well, I don't think there's any question there's nobody better. There's no better option for the Cleveland Browns. I think the big issue that you have is you go back to when he had success and you had this collegiate style of offense, this Baylor style of offense that he ran, and he was exceptional under the Shanahans doing that. But you put your body in harm's way. And here's a guy that all of a sudden can't stay healthy in that system. So they have to get away from that, and it exposes him as not being a, efficient pocket passer. Could he become better? I don't think there's any question that you can continue to work on your craft and you can become better. The problem is once you have an injury history and once you start compiling one injury on top of another injury, and then also when you're an elite level athlete and you rely on athleticism to get you out of harm's way, you're putting yourself actually in harm's way by doing that. So the guys who stay healthy on a consistent basis in this league are guys who are afforded the protection of the pocket. And RG3 gets out there on the edge. I love the competitiveness, but you have to understand at some point you're too frail to take the hits that often transpire in an NFL game. And you saw it right off the bat. And if I had talked to him in the offseason about you got to slide. You got to get out of harm's way. You can't. These guys are too big, fast, and strong. And the very first opportunity, man, he lowers his shoulder on the sideline and gets crushed. And that's it for his opportunity to start again. So I'm glad they're giving him the opportunity. But I tell you what, there's a lot of work to be done before I think he becomes an efficient starting quarterback in this league. And I'm almost on Stephen A's side. I don't know if he's going to get that opportunity.
One of the things coming out of the draft, like, maybe he should be taken ahead of Andrew Luck. But the closer people got to Luck, the more they liked him and thought that he had all these intangibles they liked. But in addition to that, Luck is big and strong, and RG3 is not as big and as strong, and the idea is maybe if playing out of the pocket as much as he does, he's going to get hurt, and that's exactly what happened and keeps happening. So I get all that. But then I look at the Browns and I think, who else they got? if you can put some offensive linemen next to Joe Thomas, and you got Pryor, and if Gordon never gets it together, like all of a sudden, RG3 can run and he can throw a deep ball, right? And you should be able to take advantage of that in the absence of a better starting quarterback, it seems to me.
Well, you brought up Kurt Warner. Kurt Warner was not only a Super Bowl champion. Kurt Warner was an individual that hadn't missed a season. We got basically RG3 missing the last 2 seasons, full seasons. And prior to that, he had gotten injured with a few games left. And so we're basically legitimately talking about 2.5 years that this guy has not really been a starting quarterback in the NFL. Everything that I've been taught about the NFL, you don't recover from that unless you're elite. And there's nothing elite about RG3, at least nothing that he's proven outside of the wheels he had on him his rookie year, which are no longer the case now. And not only that, he had breakaway speed north-south, but there was no elusivity attached to his game. He wasn't elusive like that. He couldn't shirk and jerk you and whatever. So the point is that with all of that being said, and with his questionable pocket presence and pocket passer ability, all of those things combined with a lack of repetition, I don't see how anybody can look at him and view him as a starting quarterback in the National Football League.
There are the outliers that have done that before. Warner had the thumb injury with the Giants. Remember, he went to Arizona. He was a backup to Liner. Okay? And then all of a sudden, he got his opportunity again. He got healthy, and he became that elite quarterback again and took them to a Super Bowl. But I'll go to Rich Gannon, a friend of mine. Rich Gannon was a journeyman quarterback. He played, he played for the Minnesota Vikings. He played for the Redskins. Then he finally kind of got it together in Kansas City, ended up getting benched because Elvis Gerbach got healthy, probably the biggest mistake they ever made in Kansas City. Then he goes to Oakland, and all of a sudden, bam,
Put on a show.
MVP. He was great. But that doesn't happen very often. The light doesn't all of a sudden go off and you become this MVP caliber quarterback. That is the outlier.
Does he need to do that, though, to just be a starter? All he's got to do is be good enough to. I'm not saying MVP caliber, but you just mentioned it.
Healthy.
A lot of it is health and opportunity.
Right. Yeah.
We got to leave it there. I'm going to be interested to see him play on Sunday, and
I am
obviously
too.
to see if he stays in Cleveland.
Makes it interesting.
And you mentioned Kansas City. You'll be breaking down that game a little later on NFL Live. Good to see you, Mark. Appreciate you.
Thank you, brother.
Coming up next, the NFL put the Rooney Rule into effect 13 years ago. So this rule requires teams to interview minority candidates for head coaching in senior football operation jobs. Now, the commissioner who helped develop it, Paul Tagliabue, isn't too happy with how it's played out. He's saying this at an athletics forum to Sports Business Daily. I don't think the Rooney Rule has done as much as anyone hoped it would. What it is, 5 out of 32, everyone feels, I am sure, that it would be nice if there was more talent rising to the top. Now, including Ron Rivera. Stephen A. just mentioned this. There are currently 6 minority head coaches in the NFL. Stephen A., is Tagliabue, the former commissioner, right about the Rooney Rule?
He's absolutely right. There's no question about that. First of all, 5 is not enough. It's not fair, particularly in a league that's better than 65 to 70% African American. We all know this. But more importantly, when you dissect and really look at the Rooney Rule, it's not just about the NFL. It's about all these professional sports leagues. And it's about something that needs to be said that's very really been said. When you talk about diversity and diversity policies, let's just call it what it is. It's been very, very disingenuous. There's no way around it. You've got a situation where it's limited policies, and more importantly, there's no policing. And so as a result of that, where's the consequences for failure for those who fail to comply? There's really none as far as I'm concerned. If you think about it, Max, when you think about affirmative action, obviously it was introduced in 61 by the Kennedy administration, ultimately exacted and implemented in the law by the Johnson administration in 1965 when Lyndon B. Johnson tried to explain what it was all about. It's sort of like evening the playing field. And what you had to follow was in corporate America, that is, Molly, Max, is a centralized policy, whereas you literally attached incentives to the policy to sort of provoke executives to do the right thing. For example, they would have things attached to their bonuses. Your bonuses were bigger. If you addressed things, people called it quotas and things of that nature because they were trying to knock it down and decry it. But ultimately, individuals who were otherwise prone to be unfair were incentivized to be fair because they had things attached to it from a bonus perspective. You don't have that going on here. There's no individual in the league office, whether it's the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, that I've heard of. Now, the NBA doesn't need it because they have a great record on issues of diversity. But when it comes to Major League Baseball, when it comes to NFL, when it comes to other sports, where's the centralized figure? Where's the individual as the overseer? Where's the office that focuses on it to make sure that candidates like general managers, not just coaches, but general managers, scouts, player personnel directors, etc., that you have these individuals inserted on a list where you know there's a bunch of qualified candidates to speak of. When we were in Pittsburgh, doing the show from Pittsburgh, it's one of the things during my radio show there that I sat down and spoke to Mike Tomlin about. He was very passionate about it, and he spoke about those things, along with a bevy of other African-American coaches who have called me off the record. The bottom line is you have a situation where it's left up to the devices of individual teams and individual owners who are not prone to do the right thing, which they've shown on many occasions, and they still continue to show.
The question, we're talking about here is the Rooney Rule and the idea that Tagliabue thinks it's, hasn't been working the way it's intended. Is he right about it? No, I think it is working the way it was intended. I think listen, we had Bill Polian on the other day, and he talked about they need to get the pipeline full of talent, which they haven't done a good enough job of, et cetera. But when I asked him point blank, and this happens whenever I ask executives whose hearts are in the right place, it seems to me, about that, no, the Rooney Rule is a necessary first step. The issue is it's not the only step that needs to be taken. I mean, and that includes, by the way, challenging implicit assumptions that people who are in positions of power have about race. There are many aspects to it and many different kinds of avenues of attacking the problem. And the Rooney Rule was an important and effective first step. But it's not like you can just come up with that rule and racism is over. It doesn't work that way. We're not post-racial, and that's not the only thing that needs to be done. The question as to whether it's been effective, I would say yes. You brought up Mike Tomlin, who, is it ironic or is it fitting that Tomlin gets an interview with the Pittsburgh Steelers, Rooney, and as a result of the interview gets the job. And there are other examples of that, and I think that that's been a good thing, but clearly more must be done.
But I think you're misconstruing what Paul Tagliabue was answering. We're not Paul Tagliabue, myself, and others would never say there's been no benefit to the Rooney Rule. If I thought there were no benefit, I would have said that when Bill Polian was on our show last week. That's not what we're implying here. What we're saying is, although there was progress from the Rooney Rule's inception, as we look at it now and the advancement one anticipated would ultimately take place, that's what's not happening. No. By mere virtue of the fact that Bill Polian said that there's a pipeline that needs to be addressed and improved and buffered. The fact that in the year 2016, we still don't have that in place, that infrastructure is not there, that those things are not being addressed, that things are not being centralized to such a degree where teams and owners can be held accountable for unfair practices, for example. Those kind of things have to be addressed. The Rooney Rule was supposed to eradicate the need for any of that. But by virtue of the fact that there is still a need for that, highlights the fact that people are still not about doing the right thing.
Well, I think
that's the issue here that Paul Tagliabue was speaking to.
And okay, fine. I find that hard to disagree with, right? But I think my big point, at least about this subject, is the Rooney Rule is excellent. It's good that it's implemented. It's had a positive impact. Much more needs to be done. And if the idea is, hey, the Rooney Rule is there and now everything will be okay so long as it's rigorously applied, I think that flies in the face of the reality that generally, if people are not from cultures of persecution and don't identify with the struggle, or at least it's not a priority for them, then you come up with a rule that addresses the problem for your business from a public perception point of view, maybe even a PR point of view, maybe even from your own kind of internal moral compass, right? It satisfies that, and now you can go on. And the point is, much more has to be done, and maybe it's not as important to many of the people in positions of power as it should be.
Exactly, Max. And that latter point is why what Paul Tagliabue said is so profound. Because the rule is in place for you to exercise a level of fairness. But the fact that you're unwilling to do so speaks to the heart and the soul, or the absence thereof, as it pertains to this particular issue. So when you have a league who's profiting off of the very kinds of folks they want to alienate from positions of influence or power, that's why things need to be centralized. That's why the importance of it needs to be elevated. And that's why it's important what Paul Tagliabue said, because he's saying that what it was intended to accomplish, ultimately it's not doing so because it hasn't legislated the heart and soul of people the way we were anticipating it would. And ultimately, that's going to be a problem considering the demographics that exist in our league. I totally understand it, and I applaud him for saying
well,
so.
he brought attention to it.
And the mandate needs to extend to assistant and coordinator positions. And
GMs.
Yes, but also so that pipeline we're talking about, so the lower levels, the guys get an opportunity as well to reach those head coaching and get the right experience.
And college sports.
Yes.
College sports has to come along because we need a pipeline from them too.
Of course, very good point. Let's leave it there.